Welcome to the world of freedom. No more law exams. These can all burn. Despite being submerged in studying, I did manage to read a few books in July, and in all honesty, they are what kept me sane this month. Let's jump straight to it. We're going to go from worst to best. And spoiler alert, I actually didn't read a single bad book this month, which is amazing. First up, we have The Stolen Heir by Holy Black. It's part of the Folk of the Air series. You really should read it after reading the Cruel Prince trilogy, otherwise it probably won't make a lot of sense to you. I enjoyed it. It felt very nice to read, kind of maybe even nostalgic, possibly because I'm already familiar with the world and it just brought out these very warm emotions as I was reading it. But I wasn't as taken by it as I were with The Cruel Prince. Maybe because The Cruel Prince was so fresh and new, and jumping into this, I already knew so much about the world that I didn't really find anything that was very captivating. Now, I really do love Holy's writing style. It is magical and whimsical. It's very light to read. The world building is beautiful, and despite it being easy to read, it doesn't lack vocabulary, and the style is not very simplistic, and the book is definitely not boring. Now, I can't really discuss this without spoilers, so if you haven't read it, then you can skip to this timestamp. If you don't plan on reading it, then you can just listen to me rant. Okay. Brittling Oak was completely out of character for Ren, and it was unnecessary. I feel like the plot point of the brittle was introduced just so we could have an enemies to lovers trope, which honestly doesn't make sense if that really is the case, because from the get-go we know that they are not enemies to lovers. I do feel like Ren and Oak were made into bad copies of Jude and Carden, just kind of sprinkled with stardust. Jude was scared of being glamoured and controlled by the fairies. Ren was scared of being trapped and controlled with the brittle. Jude then gets Carden to vow to obey her for a year and a day, and that's how she gets control over him. Ren puts the brittle on Oak. They both do unto others what they don't want to be done unto them. But here's the thing, Carden made the vow willingly, while Oak had the brittle put on him, and then he was put into a cage, out of nowhere. It wasn't even like he made a grand betrayal, he just kept a secret from her. Ren could have just dumped his ass in prison for a few days, and he would have probably gone to prison willingly for her anyway. Like, utter stupidity. Also, Oak is the sunshine playboy version of the dark playboy that is Carden. Surely we could have gotten something different for his character. So that was a bit disappointing. And I'm sure a lot of people will say that it does make sense for him to be a playboy because he is Locke's brother, because of his mother's powers. But also, no. No, it doesn't. He was raised by Madoc and Oriana, and the sisters that Locke played with, and the sister that killed Locke. Surely your environment plays a role in how you're brought up as a person. Surely, it should, you know? When I first started reading this, I actually enjoyed Oak and Ren's relationship more than Carden and Jude's because it felt more natural, more pure. But then it all just kind of started going downhill. And there is this Goodreads review which sums up this duology quite well, and it says, every single mention of Oak's hooves was a jump scare. The Stolen Heir gets a 3 out of 5. And then we have The Prisoner's Throne. Honestly, there isn't a lot more that I can say about this duology. There was a big switch in Ren's personality in this book that just, at least for me, felt really forced and illogical. All the miscommunication in this duology was absolutely annoying, and it made no sense. Plot-wise, it made no sense, which is key. There's a difference when it doesn't make sense because that's just the characters and how they are and it's part of who they are, and when it just doesn't make sense plot-wise, character-wise, writing-wise. Unfortunately, in this case, it was the second way of not making sense. Also, there is a switch from the first-person POV in the Stolen Heir to a third-person POV in The Prisoner's Throne, which I actually didn't notice until someone mentioned it to me, which I think goes to show that I really do prefer when books are written from the third person, because I always notice when it's from a first-person POV, and I always kind of struggle with it. So in a way, The Prisoner's Throne was maybe easier for me to read because it was from a third person, but development-wise, The Stolen Heir is the one I like more. Also, and this is very important, I really hate reading the word badass in a book. The Prisoner's Throne gets a 3 out of 5 as well. We're moving on to The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. When it comes to the writing style, it's a very well written book, and that's exactly what I expected because of the author. I loved Vicious. I am really looking forward to reading more of V. Schwab's works because of Vicious. However, this book was a bit of a disappointment. There is a lot of repetition in this book. Like, we will forget how Addie feels, who she is, what haunts her, and that people forget her. Which might be intentional and it makes sense with the story, but it did get annoying at one point. And boring. Same with all the repetitiveness of her thoughts and where she goes and what she does, and I guess it's on purpose. And if I felt any emotional connection to the character, I would probably enjoy it, but alas I didn't. The book is so focused on emotions, and they run so deep, so tragic, and yet I don't feel anything. I can't connect. Maybe it's because I don't feel things so deeply? Even though I do think of myself as someone who is very in touch with her emotions and can get quite emotional at times. I don't know, I just don't feel all this drama. And I am genuinely curious if there are people who feel so deeply. It must be exhausting. In all honesty, I found Henry's character repulsive. And that's because of all of the drugs and alcohol, which are things I am very much against and I find extremely repulsive in real life. But the fact that I felt such strong repulsion means that his character was very well written. And I would have liked to read more about Luke. I would have liked to have a Luke POV, just so I could figure out why he found Addie so important. And I do think that if we had his POV, this book would have been way better. It's like something was just missing from the book. Also, all of Addie's lovers must have bladders of stone. Because how did they last so long not going to the toilet and forgetting her? How? Now, I was reading this as a part of a 2-person book club. Maybe I should just call it buddy read. Reading buddy? I prefer a 2-person book club. So I was reading it with a friend, and I started before she started. So I think my first few messages about the book sum it up pretty well. First one is 60 pages in, and the book is kinda depressing. Page 121, and nothing has happened. Addie gets a 3 out of 5 from me. And finally, we have Spinning Silver. It was recommended to me by Lionag? I'm sorry. They recommended it to me because it has some similarities to the Folk of the Air series, which I can kind of see, but also not really, but we will get into this. First of all, the POVs really are a bit confusing, so I get why it was recommended I listen to it as an audiobook, but I am really not good with audiobooks. I don't do audiobooks. I can't. I need to read, okay? I need to hold the book and I need to read, okay? It has to be in my face, it has to be away from a screen, and it has to be nice and quiet because I am the type of person that gets really overwhelmed by noise and lights and screens and whatever. Also, my attention span is not that good. The moment it starts talking, my mind goes somewhere else. The POVs were confusing only for a little while, and then once I got used to them, they were fine. I can see why you think it's similar to the Folk of the Air in a way, specifically because of the whimsical fairies, and in a way the world building as well, but at the same time, I feel like it's also vastly different. I feel like this is a Christmas story. I should have read this during Christmas, and I possibly would have liked it more, because I was reading this when it was like 30 degrees outside, surprisingly for the UK, so it was a bit odd. I couldn't really get into the vibes. What I found tedious about this book was the lack of dialogue. Like, seriously, there is a huge lack of dialogue. So the narrative gets a bit tedious because of the lack of breaks. Another issue I have with this is that most of the time I wasn't sure where we were headed. And it wasn't because there were a lot of surprises and twists and turns. It was because there were no clear stakes. I think we started getting an idea of what the stakes are about halfway through, which for me as a reader is a bit too late to be presented with the stakes. There were also a lot of things from the world building that were left unexplained, and maybe it's because the author wanted to maintain this feeling of mystery, but I personally didn't feel that. To me it felt like unrefined world building. I loved Wanda's character. I think she was the best written character, and I also loved Stepan's POV because that was something new. Seeing things from a child's perspective, it was refreshing. One thing I particularly didn't enjoy was Miriam, which is not really good because she is the main character, but what I didn't enjoy about her character was that it felt, again, unrefined. Like, she all of a sudden gets these powers and she doesn't question them. There's nothing really discussed about them. It's like, oh yeah, I have this now. And there's nothing more. And that to me doesn't make sense. Again, I think we would have benefited from some more POVs, maybe some of the actual fairies, so we can go a little bit deeper into their world, so that's when we could have gotten more world building. I did finish reading it, and I didn't feel any really strong negative emotions about it that would actually trigger a rant, so that's a good point. This for me is a hard book to rate, because I didn't really like it, but I can't say it's a bad book. I also can't say that I won't read anything else by this author. I might pick up another book in a few months or in a couple of years when I am prepared to not read a lot of dialogue. Because again, I think like this is a mood read, a vibe read. Even though I have issues with some of the author's stylistic choices, I still think it's well written. The writing is very consistent and it did manage to create a magical world. So I give this a 3 out of 5. This is all I have for you from July because I was a ball of stress and studying and I barely had any time to just live. I didn't read a single bad book this month, which is a huge achievement, but I also didn't read anything that was exceptionally good. These were all considerably light reads, apart from Addie, so if you are feeling stressed the same way I was in July, then I do recommend you pick these up because they're just light reads. I hope you will have a wonderful August and that you will read lots of really good books. If you have any recommendations that are sci-fi or fantasy, please share because I don't want to read about the real world and real people. Okay, just putting that out there.